Nice to see you. That's kind of a good thing, right? As we get to the end, it seems like everybody has been in a group with everybody else at some point, so it's nice to see everybody sit together and get an opportunity to visit. And it seems like the more these meetings have gone on, the harder it is to get us started because everybody's collectively visiting, so I think that's a good sign. So nice to see you all. Thanks for being here this evening. Hard to believe we're in our 6th meeting and starting to wrap up our conversations and put together a recommendation to go forward. I think that means we're at a pretty exciting point in this process, and I'm looking forward to what comes next, which is taking our thoughts out to our community and getting feedback on that. I think that'll be a good conversation for us all to have with our community. So tonight we're going to be talking about the status of the process. You know that we're ending phase 1 and preparing for phase 2. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page with what that means. We're going to talk about the recommendations that we've had so far, and then last meeting we got some input from y'all, and so we're going to share that feedback out so y'all can see how that one did. And that's really a recap on the 3 items. One was a discussion of the stadium. We had that conversation come up and needed to kind of round out what would happen if we made a high school recommendation, and there's some follow-through pieces that we needed to look at. The second piece was additional schools and kind of looking at the elementary growth and where that's going to be in our growth pattern so that we know, what's going to happen there long-term, how quickly is that growth going to be happening. The third piece was land acquisition and looking at our property, where we have it now, where we might need it as our district grows in the next 5 to 10 years. So after that, then we'll have next steps, which will be talking about the presentation that we will need to do to the Board of Trustees. The next step after that is gathering community feedback. We'll tell our board, we'll tell our community, and then potentially have the formation of a bond steering committee if all of that goes well. So if y'all are ready, we're going to go ahead and start with phase 1. And I don't have that's okay. So phase 1 is the committee convening, and then us being charged to deliver a recommendation from this committee to our Board of Trustees. So we're in that process still. The next piece that comes up is that recommendation to the board. We need to take them the information that we've gathered together, talked about over a number of meetings, and share that with them. They'll give us feedback on that, and then it goes out to the community for feedback, and that's really going to be a validation or a clarification process. We may get, yes, this group really has a really good pulse on the community as a whole, or no, you guys have a lot of information, but we've got a lot of other people to bring along with us, and so we'll find that out in that next step. That takes us then to phase 2. Once we've gotten that feedback, then we're coming out of long-range planning, and we're moving into a different committee, which is our bond steering committee, and that's really where we make the shift from this being collaborative with staff being a part of the decision-making process, a part of the recommendation process, and moving to our community really driving what are those recommendations going forward, and our staff becomes the resources on the side to come in to help answer questions, to help give information, but it's ultimately that committee decision. It's our community-based members that are going to help us move that forward. Bond steering then takes the approved recommendation and they build a bond package, so that's a different set of work that comes up. Then the bond steering would recommend their package to the board based upon what they think actually needs to fit in that. So knowing that we may have some recommendations, they may not necessarily match what happens in that next set. And that's a normal part of the process. They've got a budgetary piece that they've got to work through. And so then the board accepts, rejects, or modifies that recommendation, and then would potentially call for a bond election. And so that's kind of phase 2. Once we finish up that last half of phase 1, which is after tonight's meeting, we kind of conclude, it rolls into that and then continues to kind of grow its own life from there. So we're going to go back through the recommendations from last meeting and share out that survey data and the conversation points just to make sure we're all on the same page. Now I'm going to hand it over to Scott.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Just to kind of review where we started at the beginning of our last meeting. So as far as our preliminary recommendation goes, building a second comprehensive high school for 2,500 students. We were at about 80-20% agreement on that. Building future middle schools at 1,200 student capacity moving forward. Again, we're at that kind of 80-20 level on that as well. Consider expanding Sycamore Springs Middle School not a strong majority agreement on that expansion. And so this is the language that we'll be sharing with the board. And then we talked about recommendation for stadium, athletic facilities to support the second high school if it's built, and then recommendation for future elementary schools, elementary 6, and then a recommendation for land acquisition. And so that's what was the discussion item at our last meeting. So when we asked the question, recommendations for the stadium, which of the options do you recommend is the best solution for the district? So option 1 was modifying Tiger Stadium to support a second high school. Number 2 is build a second competition stadium to be dedicated to the second high school, or do nothing to Tiger Stadium. And so overall, I think we had 26 respondents. I think we had 25 that were in favor of option 1. Any discussion on this one before we move forward? Okay. This might be a short meeting. Okay, our next one, our next topic that we talked about was recommendations for future elementary schools. And so what this is our enrollment projection data from our PASA report. And what we have here, this is our overall elementary enrollment. So we hit 4,513 students in 24-25, and that's when we exceed our current capacity. And so that's when elementary number 6 is needed. And this was pretty cut and dry. There wasn't a lot of discussion on this. Any discussion or questions on this one before we move forward? Like I said, it's going to be a quick meeting. Okay. Last one we have here, should the district consider purchasing additional property for future construction? And so this is beyond what the district already owns. And so again, we have almost 90% here on this one, about 12% saying no. Any questions or discussion on this one? Okay, I'm moving on again. So, kind of in conclusion, this is the complete recommendation package that we have, and this is what we'll be presenting to the board. And so, these are kind of those bullet points. Again, second comprehensive high school at 2,500, middle schools moving forward at 1,200, consider expanding Sycamore Springs Middle School, modify Tiger Stadium to support a second high school, build elementary 6, and purchase land. And so as we present this, we'll kind of be taking them through the story of kind of how we did this. We'll be bullet pointing out, we're not going to go through in full detail everything that we talked about relative to the second high school and all the alternatives, but we'll touch on it, the things that we considered and why that ended up being a recommendation. And then they'll give us feedback on that. And so this is kind of, again, the outline of what that recommendation package will look like to the board. So any questions on that overall? Yes?
This just came up today, and I don't know if it would just roll into new high school, but we potentially need a new 18-plus facility. They were moved out of the building, they're in a portable, which is functional, but I don't know if that would be a separate thing or go into the high school. 18-plus is when our students in our ACC life skills classrooms graduate, and they have 3 extra years of services with us.
So that's a really good question, and I think what we would do is it would be part of the high school conversation with the steering committee. So with the second comprehensive high school, here are some of the programs at the existing high school. One of the needs that needs to be addressed long term is a permanent home for the 18-plus program. So that would be, as we start to list out all of those additional needs that need to be considered, that would be something that we would talk to the steering committee about. And probably bringing in, as we have those conversations with the steering committee, pulling in resources from different programs to help with that.
Sure.
And Clint, I hadn't of our recommendation items on the list currently, but is there, I'm guessing there's a plan to deal with in some way the existing administration building as a move takes place out of the administration building and into the Refer Elementary School? Is there a plan there? I know it's not something we've been discussing, but just out of curiosity, I was wondering.
Yes, and that's a good example of where kind of the work of this committee kind of crosses over with the work of the bond advisory committee. One of the conversations that we would be having, it could go either way, but one of the conversations that we've started with the bond advisory committee at some of our, we meet with the bond advisory committee quarterly, is the possibility of using remaining bond funds from the 2018 bond, because when we move out, when we move out of the existing admin building into the old Walnut, at some point, we'll have to demolish, tear down the old admin building. And so one of the potential projects that could be completed with remaining 2018 bond funds would be the demolition of that. Yeah. So that's a decision that needs to be made between discussions with the steering committee and also discussions with the bond advisory committee is which is the best way to go in terms of how to handle that.
Yeah.
So at what point in the process do we line item what goes under each one?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
When do we line item what goes under each one of these things? Because, you know, future middle school is probably easy, but middle and second high school has other implications.
So I think that's the detail that we get into in the bond steering committee. Like this is big picture. Where are we going? Bond steering committee will talk about those details. And there'll be, remember when we get into design, that's something that's a completely separate and dedicated process. Clint, do you want to add anything to that? Okay. I'm coming.
No, I want to. Is there a rank order of preference that gets communicated? So for instance, does purchased land actually fall at number 6, or is that higher up on our priority list? How does that work?
It is not prioritized.
Okay.
That's bond steering.
Okay.
Yes.
Probably is an offshoot similar to what we just discussed, as she mentioned, but I would imagine that we're going to need a serious more amount of buses and transportation if we put online a new high school, new middle school, new elementary school. So what does that look like? And that should be actually on the list as opposed to what's developed in bond steering committee.
I can try to answer both of the questions.
So historically, the district is, for things like either replacement buses or growth buses, have paid for those out of general operating funds or fund balance. In fact, at last month's board meeting, the board approved purchasing seven additional buses and actually 2 portables utilizing fund balance. Yeah.
Okay. Dan.
You guys know I'm going to ask about number 3. So, considering expanding SSMS, does that carry the implication that if SSMS is not expanded, that there will be a 3rd middle school built? Is it one or the other because it's not stated specifically in that option?
That's what we would share in the detail as we go through with the board. So it'll kind of be the if-then that we talked about previously.
Okay, so I have an SSM question too. Sorry, long day. I got the fundraiser papers that came home yesterday where they're going to build a shade structure with the funds they're raising. And I'm wondering how that's going to play into possible expansion, like are we building a shade structure that's going to come down in 2 years because we expand? Should we really be doing that? And then how that affects placement of portable classrooms. Oh, good, perfect.
This year, I'll give you some background real quick. Because we're at 925 and our capacity is 850, we can no longer house all of our 6th grade students with the 7th and 8th graders in the cafeteria in the mornings. So we started using an area called the North Plaza. That's the north side of the campus adjacent to the band hall. It's an outdoor courtyard area. The fundraiser is to purchase a shade structure that will cover that area, that even on like misty days, we can still have kids outside in that area and supervise them in the mornings. That is not a space where there will be an addition if the campus is expanded. So we wouldn't spend money, put that up, and then have to take it down to put in an addition. Or report, it's not where the portables will go there, so.
Any other questions? Okay, going once, going twice, moving on. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back over to Holly to talk about next steps.
I thought I was gonna sit and drink my tea a little longer. Okay, so we want to talk to you all a little bit about the process of gathering community feedback, because I feel like that's an important part of the work that y'all have done, carrying that forward, and y'all having some idea. We asked y'all for a lot of input on what we might need to do, and what really we've walked away from that is that over the next month, 6 weeks or so, we're going to need to really take a strong, multifaceted approach. And so the feedback from y'all was definitely no thought exchange. We got that loud and clear. We want to do thought exchange. But we decided that one of the best ways to put the resources, y'all really wanted us to do an education piece. So our communications team is going to work on a dedicated webpage, put a lot of the same information that y'all got to see on there, and have a lot of different parts to it so that you can, if you're really just interested in SSMS, you can really take a look at that. If you're really interested in what's the impact of elementary 6, you can take a look at that, so that we've got a lot of different pieces built out with information for people. And resources for them to go through. We're also working on putting together on that page a place where people can give feedback. So we know once we get this process even started talking about, people are going to immediately have thoughts and feedback. And so we wanted to right away have something live that will be able to do that pretty quickly and then continue to build out. We know we're going to need a series of in-person meetings, an opportunity to sit down with just different groups in the area who may have an interest in having a conversation, whether it's, a PTA or, various groups that use our facilities that may have really specific questions targeted to them. As well as then some larger meetings, certainly something more like a town hall feel so that people can come and really get an opportunity to hear all the information on various topics and then also have an opportunity to get feedback on that. And the last piece that we heard from y'all is we need a survey, but more like a traditional survey, not a thought exchange, not where people are rating and ranking, but where they're able to give some input, tell us what they're thinking about the pieces, and that we're getting kind of broad voices from across our community. So I think that through that, we'll get some things that may mean that we need to revise as we take it back to the board for them to call on steering, if that were going to be the outcome. So I do expect that right now, what we've got for y'all is that recommendation set, but we also know that some of these topics, even within this room, we don't have real strong agreement. We have some general agreement, and I think when you take this number of people and expand that, we may see that points change. And so some of the questions that y'all have tonight, certainly the SSMS one, that could turn into almost anything realistically, right? Once our community gives us full feedback, then we may see that that's not necessarily the place where we are now, and that may have to change before that goes back to the board. But I think we'll have a lot of data to receive, to crunch, and then to output to make this kind of a clearer recommendation for on steering to then even consider. So out of our committee that on steering is formed, they have that recommendation point from there, and I just want to be clear that again, that package could still change, right? We could still anticipate that we make all of the best recommendations, the community vets it, and then bond steering says these things don't all fit in there. We can only do a small piece of land, or we can't make whatever work. And so I think their job, when the question got asked earlier, to prioritize, the numbers are in the list of order that we have the conversations. So that's literally what they are, as we talk about this first, second, third, fourth. I think going forward, Ron Steering is going to be the people who say, we move this up or we move this down. This is where we want to spend our money, and this is what we think as a community at large we can get behind. And so certainly I think that as we see this process take off, it may change from the work that we've done here, and that doesn't mean that we haven't done good work here. It just means that the work looks a little bit different when it enters into that next phase, and that's a natural part of the process. Wanted to talk a little bit about that committee and where we are right now. So currently, we told you last time we were looking for about 20 members and that we would not have staff serving on this committee. Staff would be a resource on the committee. We are hoping for diverse representation, and we kind of gave you an example of some different areas where we might be looking for representation. I think this over here gives you an idea of kind of like, right now, we have 8 high school parents who volunteer. That's probably over-representation, and we want to broaden that out. So obviously, all 8 high school parents won't be on. But if they then fit into another category that they're a long-timer or a newcomer, we may then be able to pick up some different perspectives. But we just want to make sure that within this conversation, we're really balanced in representing our community. So if you didn't get a chance to express your interest at the last meeting, I think there was an issue with some people accessing the QR code. I want to make sure that you know we'd love to have you continue on with us and to be a part of this conversation. Just know that in that process, part of it is going to be us trying to work to make sure that we've got representation of a lot of different voices and a lot of different interests so that then we get the best package going forward. So this is where we are now. If you know any accountants or real estate developers, or if you happen to be one, we'd love for you to fill that out. And if there's any other groups, feel free to email me if you think we've missed a group on here. Certainly we want it to be, a good representation, and so we may have to try and find some other members to add on in a place or two in order for us to have that, because we don't want it to be overrepresented in any area. So what questions do y'all have now with that information? This is like the shortest meeting. We couldn't get y'all to sit down and stop talking. Now I can't get you to start talking. Do y'all feel good about your work overall? I have to say, this has been an enjoyable process. I feel like y'all talked a lot. Y'all asked a lot of questions. Y'all pushed us to bring back more information, and I think that's a healthy process. I think that's how things are supposed to work. We're supposed to kind of put it out, inspect it, knock it around, and I think that'll continue to happen in the next 2 phases. And so I don't think that's done yet. I just think every time it's made the process a little bit better, the decision-making a little bit cleaner, and I think now we've got to go out and get more information about what are we missing and what are we missing in the representation in this room. And maybe we have a lot of high school parents who, the decision doesn't necessarily reflect their kids' needs, but they're thinking about their child and their experiences now, but we may have some younger parent voices that we're missing. And so I think there's going to be some good opportunities for us to find out, did our committee overall represent our community overall, or are there ways that we need to adjust that as we move into the next phase to make sure that we have that fuller picture of what our community as a whole wants. Yeah.
The information on the website, on the information provided on the website, is it going to give our reasoning, our logical, the reasons why we think
The second high school view traffic and all of the other things that we all talked about in our small.
Yes, I think we're going to have to put some of that information out because I think that reasoning piece of it helps people to understand. Otherwise, y'all have such rich conversation that doesn't go forward, and so it just doesn't quite make sense. If they're just looking at the information, I think this is the time where we have to kind of present the case of here's how we wound up here. I think that's a great question.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
On this website, one of the things that I think is going to be critical is we're going to curate an FAQ. And so we've got 6 meetings worth of stuff that we're going to be able to make sure, all right, well, we have a lot of questions about this. Let's make sure we get that out there so that we have an answer on it. We really want the website to be the single source of truth moving forward. So we want to make sure that all that conversation is directed there so that we can respond to that feedback.
So are you hopeful to have phase 2 be about a year or 6 months?
I think we're probably looking at a couple of months.
Yeah, I'm not calling high school. Okay, I don't think it'll take a year. I think realistically, we're talking about a couple of months. I think there's a community conversation that has to have the due respect of time. But I think that y'all have made down recommendations, we'll get community feedback on that, and then that's the work that the next group processes. And so, I mean, we did this since November, and so, I mean, it's a 4-month process for us. I think you've got good information, you've got good resources for them. It'll probably be a similar process and timeline for them. And so, and certainly some of the people in this room, you already have a lot of that information, a lot of that knowledge. And so I think you bring that into that committee going forward. It's a great question.
Sounds like we end up in the summer time.
It could potentially be some summer work. I think that's fair to know, yes. Yeah, unfortunately, even though the kids go home for summer, most of us are still here. No, that's, and that can make that hard for meeting times, is getting around people's vacation planning.
Is the goal for this to be a November 2022 ballot issue?
I think, yes, that's potential, and that would be the earliest it would be possible. We're not talking May, that's not even in our hopes, wishes, or dreams, and so I think it'll take however long it takes. I think that there are some issues on the table that are burning issues that we want to be expeditious about, not making sure that we're wasting another academic year either in terms of our growth, and knowing that we're fast growth, at 10% growth, I mean, we don't get the opportunity necessarily to sit on our hands, so I do think we need to be intentional about the work.
Just to clarify for sequencing, for anybody that would be interested in participating, a potential November bond referendum would have a required call in August, around mid-August. So this process would typically wrap up at some point just before that.
And he answered his own question. Who else? I feel like I drove all this way.
It's okay.
All right, everybody wants to go home then, huh? We will stay, we'll all be here to answer any questions. Hope to see you again really soon. Thank you for all the time you put in, all the long evenings you put in, all the research you did on your own to bring information back, the conversations you had with other community members. We appreciate your time. We hope you'll continue on with us, and have a great evening.